She's the president of the Ghana Bar Association, the first female president. Please put your hands together, Mrs. Ifuagate. And sandwiched in the middle is the only gentleman on the panel. Please make welcome the Dean, Distance Learning of the UPSA, Professor Albert Puni. Madam Sandra, at an AGM, I was acknowledging the board, and I mentioned all of them, including the secretary. I was corrected that I should mention the board members and then the secretary. Is that correct? Please proceed from there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jerry Ajololo. Indeed, the board secretary is not a member of the board. He's a servant of the board, a facilitator of the board, but certainly not a member. Good afternoon, distinguished convener, distinguished guests, board chairs, board members, MDs, colleagues and governance practitioners, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back from lunch. It's a terrible thing to be given an afternoon panel after lunch when people's bellies are full and eyelids are droopy, but we shall do our best. So the previous panels and the previous discussions have proven to us quite unequivocally that every high-performing board consists, of course, of CEOs, and Professor Abuchi has drawn the clear distinction. And so the MDs, the chair, of course, the executive members, and then the non-executive members. These are the ones whose voices shape the policy for the institutions and, of course, for the companies. And yet behind this dynamic group of people, we have people, some persons behind seamlessly, a quiet force, I call them, ensuring that the structure of the board itself, the principles of corporate governance, the legalities, the processes, etc., are all aligned. They also ensure that the decisions of the board of directors are enforced and are implemented correctly, or at least that's what they're supposed to be doing. That quiet force is, of course, the board secretary. The board secretary is an important role, and yet, in my experience, and I'm eager to hear what my distinguished panel will have to say about this, a very underrated, a very overlooked, even undervalued function or role. And so today, we acknowledge nowadays, it's trite knowledge, I would say, that the company secretary is no longer the scribe of the board or the administrator of the board. It's far beyond that. The role has evolved. And so our panel this afternoon will explore the topic given to us, which is the silent architect, the role of the board secretary in shaping, and not only shaping, in managing effective boardroom governance. Is the board secretary the silent architect? And if so, how so? Our discussion will explore how this vital role is evolving in today's governance space in response to the various pressures that boards have to face, the complexity of life and of institutions and companies, from regulatory reforms to digital transformation to stakeholder expectations, etc. The expectations even of the public that boards remain ethical and for responsible leadership. We'll hear from our distinguished panelists who have been well introduced to us by Mr. Jerry Ajololo, so I shall not introduce them again. They are people who have served at the heart of governance systems in this country. They have collectively shaped, they have advised, they have strengthened boards through their insights, through their knowledge, through their experience and professionalism. And so I will begin by asking my distinguished board, my sister, Dr. Irabna Asafo-Boakye, to give us an overview of what a board secretary's role is to you today.
Hello? Okay, so for me, can I be heard, please? Am I audible? Okay. For me, the company secretary plays three vital roles. The company secretary serves as the conscience of the company, basically offering guidance and direction to ensure that the company complies with laws and best practice relating to corporate governance. So it's the conscience of the company. The company secretary is also the chief governance officer of the company, offers advisory services regarding governance, guides the board, guides the management on corporate governance issues. And then the company secretary also serves as the chief of staff of the board chairman and basically helps the board chairman to ensure that the board runs effectively, So the company secretary helps him to ensure that, the operations of the board are effectively run. So that's basically it for me. 3 C's: conscience of the company, chief governance officer, and chief of staff of the board chairman. Thanks.
Thank you, Rabna. Professor, your impressions of the role.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think that what Rabran said is strictly in the private sector. If you come to the public sector, they don't even call it the company secretary. They call it the board secretary. So governance for the public sector in regards to the role of the company secretary is quite different from that of a private company. Okay. Now, there is something that these days contemporary company secretaries should play. They should play the leadership role. A silent leader who is listening to all the whisperings coming from the board members. And then he would detect that there are dissonance between some of the board members, and then quietly will whisper it to the chairperson. So aside the scribe that we know, the company secretary has a leadership role, a silent leadership role, that tries to work behind the board to have some harmony. If you don't do that as a company secretary, you will see your board divided, and then you are in the middle, and everybody is whispering to you. So that is what I would like to add to what Rabran said, that leadership of the company secretary is a quiet leadership, but it's very vital for the cohesion of the board. So because he would, or she would whisper to the chair that these are things that are happening, and I think you have to look at it, and then how we can address the whole thing. Okay.
And yet, thank you, Professor, and yet, despite that, we are very aware that despite the role that you have clearly defined, that often board secretaries are ignored. I want to ask you, Lily, why do you think that is, and what can be done?
I think traditionally, if you look under, I'll take it from the point of view of the legislation. In the previous Companies Act, you didn't have as much detail in terms of who the company secretary could be, qualifications for a company secretary, and what their duties are. But this has been rectified in the current Companies Act, the 2019 Act, which sets out qualifications for company secretaries. You do have to have certain qualifications in order to act as company secretary. So it's not as back in the day where somebody could set up a company and then they have their sister or their brother or some cousin just fill the role because there's supposed to be a role that's a company secretary role and anybody at all could fill it. Currently, this has changed. The law gives specific qualifications for company secretaries, and it even goes deeper to set out what the roles and responsibilities of company secretaries are. And so you have that written down. They're supposed to assist the board in terms of the compliance with the Constitution and applicable enactment. They're supposed to guide the board members in terms of their responsibilities, their roles, their powers, their duties. They're supposed to, it goes beyond the scribe. That's set out in there as well. You take minutes, you keep records, you call meetings, send out notices, but you're also sort of guiding, advising, assisting the board members in their roles and responsibilities. If there's a change in legislation, you're the person that's supposed to keep them updated on what the current compliance requirements or legislation is. So it goes beyond what was previously just somebody taking minutes and keeping the minute books. It goes way beyond that, and that is actually codified today.
Board secretary, yes, got it. Is the board secretary's role is now clearly defined. I want to hear from Madam President of the bar. What is your experience of the role of the company secretary traditionally compared to now? Is the company secretary the anchor if the company was a ship, or is it its rudder? What is it now? What are your impressions?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Now, this topic for me and those who came up with this topic is very crucial and vital for the performance of any company and any institution. And the company secretary role, as has been said, you were looked on as a mere servant, a humble character, and with time it evolved. And so we heard that now we have the qualifications in section 211, and then we have the duties in 212. Now, if you look at the duties of the company secretary, specifically 212A, H, I, J, it talks a lot about legislation, enactment, law, informing the board chair and the members of the board. And it's because it needs to ensure that at all times you are compliant, lest you find yourselves facing the law. And so I always look at how important a person's role is when I look at what if the person doesn't play the role, what happens? And then you go to the sanctions. So I was just going through the Companies Act, and I realized that up to section 123, there are 38 sanctions. And the sanctions are not only for the board chair. It is the company, the chairman, and the officers, which includes the company secretary. So you sit back and you ask yourselves, it's either a summary conviction, or you have to pay certain penalty units. And some of the penalty units you have to keep on, it will be calculated up to the time that you correct the default. Now, if there's someone who can keep his or her eye, or a body, like a law firm, keep their eye on the ball, then obviously they can keep you away from trouble. So the company secretarial role right now is elevated, is enhanced. It has reached a point where we have to take the company secretary seriously, because there are several corporate governance codes. And assuming that you have a good company secretary who is walking you through and reminding you at board development sessions and all the time, you will not have yourself facing an investigative body where you have sleepless nights and you are just wondering, why didn't somebody tell me? Sometimes they were telling you, but you didn't listen. So it's about time that we take the company role seriously and pay them accordingly. Pay them accordingly. It's very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Efua. Pay them accordingly, yes. There are lots of people who agree that company secretaries today should be paid or remunerated accordingly. So how do we then correct the misconception? There are lots of board chairs here, board chairpersons. If we would take a straw poll and ask people, when was the last time you actually asked for governance advice from your company secretary or your board secretary, we'd probably not get 2 or 3 hands, because truly most don't listen. How would you advise the board chairs in the midst of us? Rabna.
For me, a lot depends on the company secretary. You can sit, quiet and be overlooked and not do your job. And if there's an issue, like Madam President said, you also face the consequences. So for me, I think that the the onus lies on the company secretary to make him or herself, her presence or his presence felt. So you have to cultivate a good relationship with your board chair and your managing director. That's if you're in the private sector, and I think in the public sector, the CEO. So it is for you to deliberately cultivate that relationship that will give you a voice that's heard. Because you are supposed to be the expert. So it's for you to develop the required competence such that your board chair will give you a listening ear. So you've got to develop the required competencies, both the hard skills and the soft skills. Because as a company secretary, though you'd want your board chair and indeed the entire board to toe your line, you don't have any powers of enforcement. They are not under any compulsion to listen to you, give you their buy-in, or take your guidance. So, you need to be sound in terms of, your technical knowledge, but you also need soft skills. You need to develop the art of diplomacy. You see, because you're dealing with very often well-accomplished, knowledgeable, high-profile personalities, at the board level, at least properly speaking, So to be able to get across to them, you've got to be diplomatic, you've got to be tactful, but you've got to know your stuff so that they will listen to you, and that way you can discharge your duties effectively.
It's a fine balance. Thank you. Thank you, Rabna. Professor, where there is conflict, because often there is conflict between, we heard from the previous panels, between the CEO and the chair, and then the board secretary or the company secretary is caught in the middle. What should a company secretary do? There are lots of company secretaries in the midst of us. How do board secretaries surmount this situation in the boardroom? To whom do they owe their allegiance?
Basically, the company secretary owes his allegiance to the chair first, to the company second, and then the third is truth. So those are the layers. First, the board chair, the company, and truth. So you, as a company secretary, first you are there, you are serving the board, but you are very close to the board chair. You normally whispers to the board chair. So what you normally have to do, like a Reverend said, you need to win trust from the board chair. That is number one. Number two, when you are going for meetings, you have to go through the agenda with the board chair. And then areas where you see conflict, you would find a diplomatic way to tell the board chair that these are areas that I think they are contentious places. So I suggest that we look at the objective, the object, sometimes the rules, the policies, and see how we can use it to manage that conflict. So the company secretary should be very, very tactful before the meeting and make sure that you engage the chairperson and then iron out some of those kind of things. If you don't become proactive and then this conflict is happening between two elephants, you may be blown out. So you have to play your tact very, very well so that you wouldn't get blown out, because you are not even a member and you don't even talk so, and then you can't be challenging things in the boardroom. You have to find a very diplomatic way to even voice out if they are veering from the rules. So it's a very, very controversial and a very difficult role. And then anybody who is a company secretary, you need to have a huge diplomacy to deal with these egos in the boardroom.
Thank you for that, Professor. Is it therefore the role of the secretary to bring whisperings and murmurings in the corridors to the attention of the chair? And if you do that, then I'll ask you, Lily, how do you speak truth to power and still maintain your seat around the table as a board secretary?
I think one of the panelists mentioned that the company secretary is the conscience of the company and of the board. And so speaking truth to power should be sort of your number one objective. You're the one meant to be telling the board chairman or the board members what they're supposed to do, the legal basis for what they're supposed to do. You're supposed to guide them and correct them and make sure that they're acting in compliance with the various, enactments, constitution, whatever it is that's governing them. And so you should be proactive. We shouldn't wait for either the chairman to approach us, because sometimes it's that they don't know to approach the company secretary to ask them for advice for certain things. And so in the role of a company secretary, you do have to be proactive to bring things to their attention and then to help them with the resolution of the problems, because you're meant to be directing, the company's access, directing, guiding, assisting, advising. And so you're meant to be acting in that role to help them to resolve the whatever issues or concerns there are. We shouldn't wait and sit down and think people will come to us to ask for guidance. We should be proactive or pushful, as we say, and then approach them, educate them, teach them what they're supposed to do. I agree that you do have to be diplomatic about it. You do have to have the soft skills to be able to navigate your way through people's egos and people's peculiarities. But you do have to do this.
And how do you maintain independence and objectivity, Madam President of the Bar, in the midst and face of all of this?
Thank you very much. I think as a company secretary, you should be very professional in whatever you do. And that starts from day one. Your principles should be known by all. And your principles should be undergirded by the law. Once people know that this is who you are, then whatever they do, they'll be careful to toe your line. But if you try to worm your way with all kinds of gifts or whatever into the pockets of the chairman or the CEO, and there is something that you have to say, you have to speak truth to power, you find yourself compromised. You don't know how to say it the way it should be said. So from the word go, be principled about it and make sure that you are always drawing the attention to the law. The law doesn't change. And when the law is sending you to court, it's the same law. So you have to be firm, you have to be honest, you have to apply all wisdom, and a lot of shuttle diplomacy to make sure that whenever they see you, they know that this is the conscience of the company coming. But where you find yourself in so many pockets, then you have a challenge. And what it means is that then your professionalism would wane. And therefore, you cannot be the salt that you are to the company, because you would have lost your saltiness. So my advice is that let's stay on the true and narrow path all the time. You'll be respected for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President of the Bar. Let's talk now about boardroom governance and strategy. Professor, can you share your thoughts on how a board secretary can influence strategic decision-making around the table? Of course, you're not a member of the board, but you have influence. And how can a board secretary in the midst of us learn how to do this?
So the secretary role in strategy is very, very important. In fact, you have been with this board for a very long time. Some of the board members have left. You are still in the boardroom. So you know the context and then the past decisions, things that were done, you have all the memory. So if a company is looking at strategy, you would bring your institutional memory to bear on the strategy so that they wouldn't go back doing things that they have done and it's not working, because you are a secretary and you have been with this board probably for more than all the board members. So you have a very good perspective of historical issues that has happened. And I think that that is the way you can bring the context around. Some of the things that the environment you did that doesn't work, you have to really bring it out in a diplomatic way. Always, I say that the company secretary should be somebody that is a huge diplomat. You are bringing something that never worked, but you bring it in a way that will shape the discussion in the boardroom and then direct the board in implementing very good strategy that would inure very well to the company, not to repeat what has been happening and it's not working. So that is the way I think you have to bring your experience in historical issues to shape the context of the strategy so that the strategy can be implemented well.
Your experience on boardroom strategy, Irabna, how can a board secretary or a company secretary influence?
Okay. So typically, at least in the private sector, the company secretary reports both to the MD, managing director, and the board chair. And it's critical that for both of them, there should be no surprises in the boardroom. It's critical that the MD and the board chair are aligned. So when it comes to strategy, of course, it's the management that will typically work on the strategy and present it to the board for their input and alignment. What I recommend is typically you would have pre-board meetings. So a meeting between the board chair, the managing director, and the company secretary ahead of board meetings. So it's at that meeting that you would discuss, all the issues. If the managing director is to present the strategy to the board, it's at that meeting that you'd iron all the issues out, make sure that the board chair and the MD are on the same page, and whatever input you have to make in that respect regarding the strategy, you would share at that level. And so when it is brought up at the board meeting, you find that the MD and the chair are aligned in terms of the strategy. And of course, they take inputs from the other directors. But you would have given your input earlier on, because at the board meeting, really, unless you're advising on governance and legal matters, typically the company secretary won't speak. If anything at all, you'll speak through the chairman. You will nudge the chairman, with your guidance and so on and so forth. So in terms of strategy, I believe that the company secretary's input would come ahead of board meetings, as you caucus with your MD and your board chair, and then hopefully once the strategy is presented to the entire board, they will come along, make their inputs, and so on and so forth.
Thank you, Rabna, for that. The role requires a lot of engagement prior to the board meeting. I think that is when you have the optimum opportunity to engage on matters on strategy and so forth. Lily, when politics enters the boardroom, which nowadays is not uncommon or has always been so, what should a board secretary do, and how should a board secretary guide in a way that ensures that they do not lose their seat?
I I think our head of the bar said it well. The law is the law is the law. You're meant to be advising on the law. You're meant to be advising on the constitution of the company, any relevant enactments, any relevant legislation. And that doesn't change. Whether, whichever party is in power, the law remains the law. And so politics should not influence your interpretation of the law or your advice. The advice should be based on the law and not who is in power, because power changes sometimes every 4 years, and your advice can't be changing depending on the color of the person or the party that is in power. And so you're meant to be the constitution, the conscience of the company again. And so you go by the law or by whatever charters or constitution of the company that are applicable, and you advise on that basis. The law, the constitution, the charters don't change depending on the color of the party or the person that's in there.
That is where the key skill of neutrality and independence of thinking comes into play, I suppose. Madam Chair, Madam President of the Bar, I will ask you, do you think that our African context or even our Ghanaianness affects the way in which board secretaries are perceived in Ghana?
In terms
Culture.
of us being too, is it blurring the lines that should be there? So I think that it is for that reason that we have a number of corporate governance codes for various institutions. And SIGA has one, which is well thought out and well written. I know the Bank of Ghana also has a voluminous code, because others have been that way before. And so they have tried to caution you by drawing up all these codes. Now, it seems that sometimes when we finish with these codes, we just put it on the shelf. But ideally, for our board development sessions, we should pick a segment of the code and deal with it as often as we can, various segments, so that the board members familiarize themselves with the code. Because there are some institutions where, for instance, you cannot employ a relative. And before you can say, Jack, the board chair is cajoling you to bring in his niece, for instance, because it's African to help. Okay? Now, if you go along with him, you find yourself violating some of these codes of conduct. And then also, if anything goes wrong by virtue of passing on information, then you are totally exposed. Then the question is, when you got to know, what did you do? And I don't like being asked that question. So I prefer to let you know from the beginning that yes, we have to ensure that we are helping. But is it possible to recommend that person to another institution because of something that you find in the code which does not help you? And whoever you are advising, because we play an advisory role in the company's code, whoever you are advising will come to appreciate later when they adhere to that advice. So the Africanness, please, unless the person fulfills a position or a capacity that does not contravene any of the sections of your enabling document, I would advise that you keep away from going down that line. And just to say that sometimes too, apart from the Africanness, my sister talked about the politics. It's about the same. Because if you do not adhere to the principles, they will come and bite you. And sometimes they'll come and bite you so badly that you wish you had listened. And so for those who, we heard this morning that when it's politics, it is a shortcut. And we know that shortcuts are dangerous. So let that be at the back of your mind. If you don't want to be asked to go where you don't want to go, please advise. And if it becomes very critical and you realize that the advice is not being taken or heeded, I know some company secretaries who have resigned on principle. They just get away from it. Because if you are thinking only about your job and you are thinking about security of your job, but then at the end of the day it's going to turn otherwise, and you know what it is, then advise yourself and jump off the ship so that when it's sinking, you are not there. So it's important that we look at these things, the Africanness and the politics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President of the Bar. Professor, the law notwithstanding, and the IOD has a code as well, just to put it on the record, a governance code as well. The governance codes notwithstanding, the laws and regulations notwithstanding, I still sense that board secretaries do not feel empowered enough around the table. I mentor a number of young board secretaries, and they still do not feel that level of confidence. So I would like to hear your perspective. Do you think that our Ghanaianness should be treated? And what can we do to ensure that we gain the power and authority that is given, that is by law established, actually, and that our culture and our being does not affect the way we advise around the board table?
Okay, thank you very much. I have done a lot of board evaluations, both private, public, whatever. And then if you encounter a board, you see that the board culture actually shaped the perception of the board members towards the secretary. So if you go to certain sectors, because of the regulatory framework there, especially the banking sector, they have a perception about the company secretary, and then you can see that the company secretary is very highly rated there, respected. If you move from that regulatory environment to other environment, the company secretary, sometimes the board secretary will be called, sometimes even not the person who, sometimes some clerk will be called to come and just take the minutes. Okay, so it is something that education should go out there, that now all over the world regulations are being up, and then the role of the secretary is being very huge role in the boardroom. So I think the education like such summits sometimes dark the trick, because if you go to the public sector, the issues in the private sector, especially in the banking and the regulatory environment, is different from that of it. And I think that if the company secretary is trained very well and is empowered, it actually helps the board, because then the secretary would be able to tell the board the regulatory issues that they have to, that you wouldn't go to jail if some of these things you were told and then you were explained to by the secretary. So governance for secretaries is not just about the sector too is quite important. If you look at those sectors, they don't have a problem, but the other sectors, you can't just take anybody to be a secretary for the board. The minutes are the legal documents that can be tendered in court anytime. So you can't get any clerk to come and then write minutes that are vague, that are sanitized, and one day issue come and it's tendered in court. So it's very, very, very important that we train the secretaries very well, and then the kind of mentality that we have towards company secretaries should be changed through these kind of seminars.
Thank you. Through these kinds of seminars and opportunities, and I think that in the onboarding, and orientation of board members, that this is one of the key items. Dr. Olu Ajayi did some work some years ago with our board, and I remember underscoring the fact that we need to let the board members understand the vital role of the person who's sitting around the table as their secretary. Let's look now to emerging issues and the future of the role of a board secretary. So I'll ask you, my distinguished panelists, how does technology, we heard about AI in the previous panel, ESG, and all the new governance codes, how is it shaping the role of and function of the modern board secretary? Madam President of the Bar.
Thank you. So I would start with AI. And, you know, someone did mention during the question time that he had a phobia for AI. And he's not alone. There are quite a number of people who look at AI and wonder what is coming and what is it going to take over and how do we work with it. And we heard that in UK there are boards that have embraced AI and are using it positively. And I think that where technology is concerned, these days you realize that at some meetings the board secretary would inform members that you are being recorded, even with our virtual meetings. So you hear that you are being recorded. Now, there are systems where after the recording is made, they can produce the record of the meeting for you to go through and finish up your job. So that means that that era where you have a set of minutes that can take 3-4 weeks and it's not produced. And at a certain point, even the recorder forgets the in-betweens. And so what they try to do sometimes is to slightly manufacture some bits of the minutes because they have forgotten. They are only human. But if we embrace technology, and we have this device, for instance, you can finish your meeting, and by close of the day, you have the transcript. So all you have to do is go through the transcript and then perfect it, and voila, you have your minutes to pass on. So we should look at AI and see the areas, technology, what blesses us moving forward, and what makes our work easier as a company secretary. And I think that there are other things that we can talk about, but this one in particular, I think it's a low-hanging fruit for a lot of boards. And so the earlier they make sure that they get such devices, and just yesterday, there are advanced AI systems where one, for instance, would tell you where things have been repeated. It actually sanitizes the document that you are coming up with. So please, let's embrace it bit by bit. We are getting there. And I think that it will do us some good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor, emerging issues and the future of the board secretary.
I think board members should be brought along. The company secretary should sometime educate your board members in a very, very nice way, like what the president said. These days, the reactive role of the secretary, where you produce minutes, you can get AI to do it for you. So you now have to educate your board members that there's a new way of doing things now, and then we can get our minutes on time so that you don't complain that the minutes are delaying. And then, so once they also embrace the uses of the AI, it becomes very good, And then we even explore to other areas. There is a problem with board minutes. Some of the sectors, the board minutes are just too huge. The board members cannot even read all the minutes. And then anytime you go for some evaluation, they say, oh, this thing we didn't know. It never came up, but it is in the minutes. It's in the board pack. Everything is there. Okay, you can get AI to summarize and give you very good summary of what has happened, and then you can give it to them before the detailed ones are even distributed. So AI in the boardroom is a huge game changer that we all have to embrace, and it makes the board work very efficient. We, as secretaries, we also have to educate our board members, because some of our board members, they are BBC, they were born before computers, so you have to bring them along. So it is also the responsibility of the secretaries to do that.
Very well, thank you very much, Professor. Lily, what mindset then will the modern board secretary or company secretary require as a governance advisor in this particular time?
I think it requires an expansive mindset. And you touched on ESG, which I wanted to talk about as well.
Yes, please do.
The role now also goes beyond just the mere governance, which is the G in the ESG. It's also a recognition of the effects that our actions have on our communities, and a realization that we should be sustainable. And so board secretaries or company secretaries should also be looking beyond just the governance and touching on or advising on the E and the S of the ESG as well. And so to have an expansive mindset. Also advise the company on business continuity, on risk management. You don't have to sort of give them the technical information, but if you draw their attention to that, and they can have a professional or some other person provide in-depth advice. But you do have to look beyond the taking minutes, the advising on the legislation, and go beyond that to sustainability, to the impacts the company has on its environment, on its community, on its employees as well.
Thank you. And Irabna, what mindset should the modern board secretary carry with them?
Yeah, I would align very much with my fellow panelists, an expansive mindset, remembering that training for the board is critical, it's essential, and it's really the company secretary that sort of pushes that agenda. Okay, so yes, there are emerging trends, AI, ESG, and stuff like that. You have to make sure that your board is, well trained and is well aware of all these emerging trends. Sometimes it's difficult getting them, to come together for training. They're usually very busy people and stuff like that. But the onus lies with the board secretary to ensure that you have a plan for the year and make sure that your board members are on top of these matters. I think it was Chief Andani who mentioned that AI should be embraced. I mean, it's something that should be embraced by the board. It helps the board, operate more efficiently, effectively, and stuff like that. But if your board members are, in the dark, it won't help matters. So I think the crux of the matter really is training, ensuring that your board members are trained on emerging trends so that they will be very effective. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Irabna. Professor, let me ask you this, because you spoke about evaluation. So can the effectiveness of a board, generally, any board at all, be measured by how empowered its secretary feels, the ability to speak the truth? Would that be a fair measurement of the effectiveness of a board?
Yeah, if the board is well empowered, actually it links to how empowered the secretary is. There are some boards, like I said, they are modern. Some of the board, I don't know, they are not with the trends. So they have that perception of the old secretary of many takers and those kind of things. The world has moved on. Regulations is entering into a lot of sectors. So the role of the secretary is really evolving. And then the board members must know that the secretary role, as they know it now, is not the same as they. So if the board is proactive, it helps. It helps the secretary. And then if you come into evaluation, you don't have any problem. But if they are not on that par, and then you want to bring an evaluation, there's always a challenge. So it is up to the company secretary to educate the board that we as gatekeepers, we also have to evaluate our performance so that we can also evaluate equally management performance. If management see that our performance is being evaluated, immediately management will know that no, things are not the same, and then the heat will be applied on them. But if we, the board member, we don't embrace things like that, then the company becomes stale. Nothing happens. So there's a way the boards themselves should have to embrace these things, and then the company secretary would also be whispering and then making sure that they go to training. Right? It is very easy for some sectors because of the regulations, but other sectors, like the public sector, you don't have anything like, and the president says something. For the public sector, like SIGA codes, personally, I don't believe in codes. In this contemporary, our African situation, I believe in directive, like the Bank of Ghana directive. So you are forced actually to comply with, and not to say that I will comply and explain, or no, I don't want that. So I think that as it's happening in some of other sectors, we should move it to closer to the public sector so that we force SOEs to also comply. You see, that is what I'll say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to take your closing thoughts so that we can move to the Q&A and hear from our audience and get some participation from them. Madam President of the Bar, in summing, what do you want to leave with our audience regarding the role of the board secretary in modern governance today?
Okay. Thank you very much. I would go to the tagline, we are all in this together for the common good. And it reminds me of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, which talks about the body and the fact that there are various parts, and the fact that the eye cannot look at the head and demean it or otherwise. I think we have come to a point in our journey as company secretaries that it's important for all the officers to recognize that we swim or sink together. So the importance that should be given to the company secretary is now very vital. And obviously, with an empowered company secretary, the secretary will be prepared to give off their best or his or her best to make sure that you are out of harm's way. So I would say that we are all in this together. And post this gathering, I would have loved to see subsequent smaller meetings where we can delve into some of the areas that we've talked about generally today here. Because sometimes people have questions that are delicate, and they wouldn't want others to know that this is the challenge that they are facing. But if we want to make sure that we are strong together, then post this conference, we can have those sessions, and those who are well-versed in those areas can then make sure that we come along so that we'll be a stronger chain And a stronger chain is what is going to change Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lily, thank you. The silent architect, the board secretary, your concluding thoughts and remarks on the secretary's role in managing an effective boardroom governance.
So the secretary plays a crucial role in managing governance, and the success of the secretary is the success of the board and the success of the company. And so for the company directors, chairman or chairpersons of the board, not to think, oh, the company secretary is being long, because we hear that a lot. Sort of they think it's a bother when you're trying to advise sometimes, and it's only for the good of the company. So please, let's go along with them. They're only trying to advise as they're required to do under the law, and let's work together for the success of the company. For us as company secretaries as well, let's be proactive. Let's not wait to be included in the conversation. Let's teach our board members. Let's teach management. Let's teach the board chairpersons, because sometimes it's as a result of ignorance. And so let's bring them along. Let's be proactive. Let's make sure that they get the training that they deserve, that they need, in order for the success of the company for all parties involved.
Thank you very much, Lily. Professor, your closing remarks before we go
So
to our
I
audience.
think that the world is changing fast, and then everything in terms of the boardroom is also changing. CEOs are being stressed by boards because they need to perform. Shareholders are stressing boards because they also want their dividend. The company secretary is somebody that should know the dynamics of what is happening, to always educate through the chairperson what changes are happening. And I think it's up to we, the secretaries, to know that the role is changing, and such education should be regular, so that we also educate the public that without the secretary's efficiency, the board cannot function well. The secretary's efficiency is key to the board functioning well. So once we know that, at least that role will be elevated, and it will be remunerated accordingly, because anytime I go anywhere, the secretaries complain that they are not remunerated very well, though they are having a lot of pressure. He's holding 2 positions in the company. Sometimes he was an administrative something and then a board secretary. So that is what I'll say to that.
Thank you so much, Professor. And finally, Irabna, your closing remarks before we go to the floor.
Okay. My closing remarks would be that, the company secretary plays or has administrative duties and also advisory duties. The role started out as a maybe housekeeping role, where the company secretary was like the chief administration officer. But now it's evolved into a gatekeeping role, where you serve as more of the chief governance officer. And I think it is for company secretaries to reorient our minds, and present ourselves accordingly. I mean, if you present yourself as, a scribe, that is how, you'll be treated. But it's for us to understand the role that we now have and, perform that role effectively. Indeed, I think the banking sector has really set the tone, in the sense that, per the Corporate Governance Directive, the company secretary is a key management personnel, a senior manager, And indeed, even the Companies Act envisages a situation where a director can double hat as a company secretary, So it is not it's not the role of a clerk, But the onus lies, I think, on the company secretaries to project themselves, as they in the light that they should be seen in, so that they will be effective. And I believe that the rest of the board will come along.
Thank you very much, my distinguished panel. Please, let's give it up for them. I'd like to open up the floor, Mr. Jerry Ajolololo, for questions. to, yes, Professor Douglas.
Thank you very much. Very interesting discussion. I just wanted to find out, is it a name that is causing the problem? Secretary, or should the name be changed to Chief Governance Officers?
Yes.
And then secondly, the issue of a Chief Governance Officer. Do you have to have a legal background to do that? Or a generalist? Because these days, company secretaries, as I know, you have to have a general background. A lot of them have gone to do MBAs because you need to understand finance. So, and I don't know, maybe the profession needs to do some soul searching in terms of being called scribers, because secretary means you are a scriber. And those were the old days. Now it has to change. And maybe you should advocate to be called Chief Governance Officers. You'll get more pay as well.
It's a long-standing debate, that one. Lily, would you
Madam
like to
Moderator,
answer?
if it pleases you, can we take 4 at a go?
Very well,
and then
Mr.
you-
Ajololo.
okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for the informative session. So for me, there's something which goes along with the legal aspect that has been focused on. Sometimes you see that within the companies and organizations, whilst the legal aspect is moving, nobody is chasing after checking the statutory instruments which are new, which are changing, and people remain with their old policies. And I think so it's something that we need to check, that what has changed within the legal fraternity, which we need to factor in. And we also check our policies. Some of the aspects right now, you need to go and factor in AI yesterday into your policy documents, because sometimes a customer may also take you to court when you try to link in here, then our AI did summary minutes, blah, blah. And then they say, no, in our statutory instruments, it's not there. So I will not accept the verdict. So these are some of the things. Let the company policies move along with the legal aspect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We shall take 2 more. Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank you. I think the panel we've had from the morning to now have done justice to a lot of the issues. But I'd like to draw attention to 2 critical issues. One, by passing the Statutory Corporation Conversion to Companies Act, Act 461, we have resolved as a country that the Companies Code and now the Companies Act is the governance framework that we shall all use in doing corporate governance in this country, whether you are in the private sector or whether you are in the public sector. So the situation where the impression is being created that there is a different corporate governance for state-owned enterprises and there is one for the private sector, I'm sorry. After we've spent money in this country to do this state-owned enterprises reform program and the FinSAP in the banking sector, we cannot be going back saying that there is a different corporate governance for the state-owned enterprises and there is something called the private sector. In any case, like Chief Andani pointed out, for over 20 years now, if you look at appointments to SOE boards, 60% is from the private sector. The 40% generally from the public sector is normally for institutional representation. So if the mindset works in the private sector. How come that when we bring them into the state-owned enterprises or the public sector, then all of a sudden everything evaporates? So I want to submit that that is a national issue. We have a national cultural issue. We better tackle it from that angle rather than the dichotomy, oh, it is because it is the public sector or it is the private sector. Please, it doesn't work that way. We have decided to do good corporate governance, and I have been teaching corporate governance for the past 25 years. One competence whose currency we have not found value for is the character competency. Whether you are talking about the public sector or the private sector, it is a Ghanaian problem. I would dare somebody to tell me that that is not the crux of our problem. So let us be bold, let us face the issues and say that let us show integrity, let us show honesty, let us represent our constituencies properly, whether they are the state or they are the private people.
Thank you.
And finally, talking about the company secretaries, I agree with all that has been said, especially Madam President of the Bar. I like to draw your attention to two important ladies. One, Mrs. Abavana, formerly of Cocoa Board, and Mrs. Domachire of the VRA. Those are the most powerful boards we have had in this country. But those ladies were able to tame their boards, let them see professionalism. So let us train our secretaries to be professional, and we'll get the best out of them. Thank you very much.
The word of the Lord.
Okay, thank you.
We shall take the last one.
Yes, so my name is Michael Kwejukumsin from University of Mines and Technotakwa, UMAT. I have some questions. One is organizational politics. You know, every organization has its own politics. So how can the company secretary, which is the board secretary, make use of it to its benefits? The second one has to do with, will you advise a company secretary or a board secretary to always be yes, sir? Yes, sir, or anything, yes, sir, whether the MD or the board chairman. Yes, the third has to do with, will you advise that we have a fixed term of office for company secretaries? Or maybe the person can be in it till pension, especially if it is in a public institution. The last one, which is, apart from diplomacy, are there other skills that you recommend for the company secretary? Thank you very much.
Are you sure it's not your project work you are giving?
No, please.
Madam Moderator, please, it's requested that we take one last one at the back. Madam, yes.
Good afternoon, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Isaac Obetsa.
Please, we're taking the last one from the back.
Oh.
It's
Thank
corporate
you very
governance.
Please, my question is to Dr. Opuni and then to Madam Bar President. We have had this issue, just as Dr. Douglas just mentioned, that the company secretary role and the title, is it confusing people? And what are we doing? I know Dr. Opuni is a chartered company secretary with UK body. And then Madam Bar President, please, what are we doing to bring dignity to the title of the company secretary? I know that now in the UK, the body is no more chartered company secretary. Yeah. It is now chartered governance. Yeah. And so in most, the OECD countries, South African countries, and all that, you will see that the company secretary is now the governance manager, the chief governance officer, and others. Over here in Ghana, we have people who do not even understand the role. Lawyers have taken up the company secretary role. And so therefore, we don't have a body that really sits to redefine and put structures in place for the role to be respected. What are we doing to help the role? Thank you very much.
Madam Moderator, And your
Thank you.
panelists, you stand accused.
Thank you. Madam President, I think we'll start with the matter of the nomenclature, which Professor Douglas started with, and now our final questioner. Should we
In
be
terms of the
changing the
name.
name from board secretary to something else? Chief Governance Officer was the suggestion given to us by Prof.
Actually, if you look at the current role that is played out by the company secretary, governance advisor and such names are being used in other institutions to refer to the company secretary. But we have our Act 992 just in 2019. And if we had wanted to change this, we should have made a pitch accordingly, because the Act refers to the company secretary. So this is, because you know that in some boards they can challenge it. Why are you referring to this person as the governance expert or governance officer when the law says this is the name of the officer? So I think that there's nothing wrong with advocating, and then when there's a need for an amendment, we can get some changes made. But I prefer to be on the legal side for now, because then if you challenge me, I can answer. But if I pick a name and you are going to challenge me, then I will not be on firm ground. So I think that it's necessary that even as a bar, whenever we have the opportunity to make such inroads, and yesterday the legal committee of the bar, we met and we're looking at some of these things where we have to do some advocacy, starting from Parliament and so on and so forth. So this is a point well noted, which I think we can work with. And then the second thing was on whether the company secretary, for now, should be a lawyer or should have a legal background. I think, Prof, you asked that question. Truth be told, when I looked at the duties, I asked myself, if I were a chartered accountant, how well can I perform this role unless I have continuous training? Because for us as lawyers, we'll go to court, we'll hear what is happening, we have decided cases, we'll hear, receive the latest legislation, and so we have an interest for the law. So we are always looking out for what is new. And in other jurisdictions, I have experienced company secretaries, and I had to actually go to them after the meeting and ask, are you a lawyer? The word for that pocket lawyer, you know, the person was abreast with the law, but the person was not a lawyer. If we can make sure that we have continuous training, especially maybe Ghana Bar can take it up, but something that can make all those who find a deficiency by vet train and have refresher courses and do whatever is necessary. And Prof, we can talk about that later, so that we make sure that everyone is abreast, because that is the focal point that you play in the company. If you are not advising them, I mean, that will not be the best. So it's important that we do a lot of training in that area. Thank you.
Thank you for your insights. I would add that, as the questioner at the back said, Professor, it's about the honor, the dignity, even the respect that is ascribed to the name. Many times I've been somewhere with a board and I've been given a chair at the back because the people thought I was a typist or that I just came to, and in my former role, my institution, it's simply the secretary. So the board is not even there to add the honor to it. So the secretary, oh, you should be in the back there. So it really is a pertinent question. I'd like to hear your thoughts. The audience wants to hear your thoughts.
This is a worldwide issue. It's not Ghana alone.
Indeed, yes.
It's not Ghana alone. Even in the UK, like the presenter said, the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators changed the name, and then they are now called governance professionals, because they were having issues with the naming, like how somebody was describing you as a typist. They have the same issue all over in the jurisdictions that I know. They have it. But for me, I think that whether you are a lawyer or you are not a lawyer, everything depends on you. The role, if you look at the Companies Act, the role has been expanded, the qualification. The accountant, a chartered secretary, a lawyer can all become a company secretary. Now, the role itself is not about legal issues alone. So even if you are a lawyer, then you have to learn risk management. You have to learn strategy. You learn organizational culture. You have to learn ethics, ethical leadership. So the issues about the secretary is broadened. And it's up to the secretary itself to know that this role is not just about one aspect of it. So you have to be proactive, like the president said, to also read and educate yourself very well. Because if you are not educated, how can you educate your board?
And the public perception.
And the public perception.
Because
so you
we get it that it's an important role and a highly respected role, but the public don't in many instances.
Yes, so
and therein lies the challenge.
So these are gatherings that we can actually tell the public too about the changing roles of them. Because I went into the banking sector, and I don't think that if you are a secretary and you don't know risk, the banking sector risk is so huge that the secretary yourself, you should know something about what they are talking about risks, because they talk so much about risks, and now what is creeping is cyber security. So the secretary should also be knowing things about cyber. Okay, so the role is evolving, and the regulatory issues are coming into the space. So you have to be abreast with your time. And then gatherings like this too, we tell them that the role is not about a clerk, it's about serving the board. And then if you want to serve the board efficiently, then you have to know the areas where the board committee sits. The board committees, you have nominations, you have remunerations, you have cyber, you have risks, and you have to know a little bit about these things so that when you go and you are even writing the minutes, you don't use words that the terminologies should go with the secretary. So.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Our next question, yes, please. Thank you. Our next question had to do with aligning company policies with changing statutes, the role of the secretary in this. Irabna.
Thank you. Yes, I perfectly agree. And I think, again, it's for the company secretary to probably do prompt management on the need for the constant updating of policies to reflect, the current laws and so on. So I do agree with that. I think that's a very good point. And it's something that is typically glossed over, Although now I think the compliance function, at least in the banking sector where I'm from, the compliance function plays that role quite effectively. I don't know how it plays out in the public sector, but definitely it's something that must be done.
Thank you. The question that followed that, in fact, was a comment from this side, was about the uniformity between the policies of the state-owned enterprises and the private sector vis-a-vis the practice of company law. Our questioner stated that there should be no dichotomy. the rules should be the same, whether it's the private sector or an SOE. Lily, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I do agree that we should have some uniformity in the governing law, the law that governs companies generally. And again, it comes back to the role of the company secretary. And it's incumbent on the company secretary to ensure that these are followed. Because if the Companies Act is to apply to the companies, then you have to make sure that your board actually complies with the provisions of the Companies Act. And so it's up to us. I do agree we do have to have one that uniformity, so that everybody knows that these are the minimum standards that apply to all companies in Ghana, and to ensure that company secretaries also enforce these standards and these rules, whether you're a public company, whether you're a private company. There will be differences which may be sort of sorted out in your charters or your constitution, but outside of that, we should have a basic minimum standards that apply to all of us. I wanted to give my 2 cents on the nomenclature as well.
Of course, go ahead.
I think it could be, and I do agree, a name shouldn't matter, but clearly in this case it does, because people see the secretary and they feel like it's an administrative role. It could well be a matter of adding onto it, so your chief governance officer and company secretary, because I know some companies do have that, so chief legal officer and company secretary, or chief governance officer and company secretary, so that you encompass the broad role which really the role comes with.
That's an interesting perspective. I think, Rabna, you bear both titles in your institution, chief legal officer, among other things, as well as company secretary. Your comments on the same question, Professor. Should the standards be the same? Because you see, the state-owned enterprises have their own enabling acts.
Yes.
And they defer to that first before they defer to the company law, the Companies Act.
So you have 2 types of state-owned enterprises. Those that have their own legislation setting them up, and they follow that legislation. So the composition of the board and everything follow the legislation. If you come to state-owned enterprises that have become companies, they are companies, that they're now being converted into company, then they can follow the company law. But even with that, governance, that standard is that, but governance is shaped by so many things. Who the shareholder is can even change the governance of the company. The shareholders, this is a shareholder who is a government. And the government who is a shareholder is not there forever. It's different from a private-owned company that has a shareholder that can be identified, and then we know the shareholder. So that governance of a state-owned is quite different. It's quite different because, and I have seen a lot of even private enterprises where the shareholders, the wrangling of the shareholders at the back of the boardroom is having an effect on the boardroom. You see, so for governance, the regulations are there, but the dynamics of governance is different from one place to the other.
It's completely nuanced,
Yes,
and
yes,
I think I agree with that. Is our questioner still with us, or he's left? Okay, our final question came from the PhD thesis writer, who gave us the multiple-thronged question. His first one was about organization politics. How can the board secretary make use of that? I think you alluded to that, Professor, when you talked about the organization culture affecting the boardroom itself and consequently the board secretary. Then he also asked, should the board secretary be a yes man or a yes woman? So any one of you can pick that up. Should there be a fixed term for the board secretary? Maybe you serve 4 or 5 years and then you step down, or you serve till your compulsory retirement age. And then finally, he said, beyond diplomacy, what other sets of skills should a board secretary be striving to acquire?
I think I'll take the yes man question. The basis of your advice should be sort of your constitutional documents, the enactments, the law, whatever governs your company. But you do have to bring some diplomacy and some soft skill in relating to your constituents, the board chairperson, the board, the directors themselves. So you shouldn't technically be a yes man, but you could say yes, but, so that you're not, sometimes when people hear, oh no, you can't do that, and then it's already sort of a problem. But if you use your diplomacy and say, well, yes, but, and then you sort of guide them gently to the right way they're supposed to be doing things, I think that would be a good way to approach it.
Any one of them to any one of you? Fixed term, diplomacy, and what else?
The fixed term of the secretary, I don't think we have it now, but do you want it to be? Even in the banking sector where we have fixed terms, there are a lot of issues with that. So I don't know why the secretary, who is not a board member, should also have a tenure. Because he is not a member, he doesn't even contribute, he just advises. And then we should keep somebody with a historical perspective of the board, so that if the board members are being changed, he can tell the board members that these are the contexts that we are coming from. So for me, I think that we should have somebody who would have that role there, and then board will be rolling around the secretary. So that is mine. Even with the board members, that tenure issue is creating a whole lot of issues there. So I think that the secretary's role, because of the historical perspective that is going to be given, and then looking at the changes in the regulations and everything, we keep somebody there like that who can do the housekeeping for the board.
Yes, if I may, I'd like to take the question on the competencies required beyond diplomacy. I would say character is critical. And by character, I mean integrity. The company secretary must be a person of integrity. Because that is, if you want to have the ear of your chair and your MD as well. Integrity, honesty, authenticity, it's a must-have, Without that, you're not likely to have, your board chair is unlikely to have any confidence in you, and therefore, your advice, won't go anywhere. So character, number one for me. Competence in terms of hard skills and soft skills. I think I spoke about that earlier on. You need to be technically sound. You need to know your law. You need to know the directives, and everything to be able to advise properly. We've also spoken about the soft skills of diplomacy, emotional intelligence, and so on and so forth. But one that I would give special mention to as well is communication skills. Because you need your verbal, non-verbal, written communication skills are also very critical, given, as I said, that you're dealing with accomplished, high-caliber people who don't need to listen to you. So you need to be able to influence them. You need to be able to communicate very well. And as I said, there are times when your board members, accomplished as they are, may be ignorant, in a certain respect. The way you communicate should be such that, you adopt a face-saving approach. You don't just tell them, no, you've got to be able to do all that. Okay, so those would be the three for me. Character, competence, communication skills are critical as well. Thank you.
3 C's, thank you. Madam President, do you have anything to add? We bring our discussions
Let me add courage. Because speaking truth to power requires courage and a sense of humility. If your board chair gains a lot of confidence in you and is showing you off and all that, don't start thinking that you are now a director or you've been elevated. Let's be humble in our dealings, and then people will trust us. Trust is important. As a company secretary, you hear a lot. But if your business is to be passing it on, it will come round to you. So please, trust is also important so that people can see you as the fulcrum around which the whole company is evolving. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our discussions have been very interesting. I think they reaffirm, certainly, for me, that the board secretary is not just a procedural officer. We've gone way past that. But is truly a silent architect of an effective board. And everybody knows that an architect needs an enabling environment within which to design and to create and to work. We see from our discussions, and we conclude, that the secretary's efficiency is key to the efficiency of the board and of its governance itself, and that behind every well-functioning board should be a very knowledgeable board secretary who is there not to simply scribe, but to ensure integrity, continuity, cohesion, and governance effectiveness. We conclude also that the role is fast evolving. It remains dynamic, and that in this day and age, we need to be embracing the modern topics that were discussed here, technology, and in particular, artificial intelligence. In looking forward, one clear message stands out for us, which is that we must strengthen, and the key element of training has resounded through the voices of my four panelists. We need to strengthen and empower board secretaries so that governance itself is strengthened. Remember that we are in this together. Please help me to thank my four very distinguished panelists for sharing their insights with us this afternoon. And thank you to all of you for participating in this very important discussion.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Irama Abna Safo Boache, Lilia Kwe, Professor Albert Puni Ifuagate, and our moderator, Madam Sandra Irama Thompson. A round of applause for them as they step forward and take a photograph. And because of you, we know ours as company secretaries is not just a support function, it's a strategic leadership role. Please, a round of applause for them once again. But what's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name will smell sweet. Shakespeare, right? Romeo and Juliet. How many believe we should change the name, company secretary? Show by hand. Okay. Those who still feel we should maintain it. Okay. We'll see about that shortly. I want us to take a picture of this QR code. Please scan the QR code. Let's do something briefly. It's just a one-page review we just need to do of this summit. If you have a yam, may God help you. What we want to do is answer a few questions. It's just one page. So please, if you scanned it, if you were born before computer, please, it's not a sin. Just ask for help. A young person will help you. Have we all scanned it, please? Okay. We have certificates for each attendee. They will be sent into your email, but if you desire a hard copy, it will be at a small fee, something small for baby Cerelac. So please. Let's scan the QR code, please. Have we scanned it, please? Are we ready? Okay, so number one, how would you rate your overall experience at this summit? From a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. Shall we vote? Let's move to number 2. How would you rate the organization of the event? Very dissatisfied, 1. Quite dissatisfied, dissatisfied, number 3. Satisfied, and very satisfied, number 5. How would you rate the quality and relevance of the session content? from very dissatisfied, which is 1, all the way to very satisfied, number 5. Please indicate. We have just about a few more to go, 3 more to go. How would you rate the speakers, panelists, and their presentations? The same scale from 1 to 5. How would you rate the networking opportunities provided during the event? 1 to 5. How would you rate the venue and facilities? What would you want us to improve in the next summit? Will you attend future board governance summits? Yes, no, maybe. But the last one is of importance to me. How do you intend to partner future boardroom governance summits? If you want to sponsor, please indicate sponsor. If it's individual sponsorship, please indicate individual sponsor. If you intend to be a corporate sponsor, do same, corporate sponsorship. If you wish to make a donation too, please let us know. To this end, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a time well spent, and this has been a labor of love for one man who has seen the need to improve corporate governance in Ghana. He's done this from his own pocket and through the loving kindness of a few friends who have come on as sponsors. But there's a lot more we can do. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I ask that you put your hands together as we receive our convener for his closing thoughts, Professor Douglas Boating.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Distinguished colleagues, I'm not going to take too much of your time. It's been a very long day. But first of all, let me find out, is Professor Saint Kutu still here? Professor Kutu? No, he's gone. Anyway, once again, thank you very much for making time to be with us today. I hope it's been very useful. We started today as daring to be different. Now, we have to do it. It's not business as usual anymore, and I'm hoping that you've picked up a thing or two from today, and we are going to start. A gentle reminder that whatever we are doing today is not just for us, it's for tomorrow and for the unborn African child. We owe a duty to them. It starts in the boardroom, and we are the boardroom. I thank you very much for being with us today. Now, please, there's a certificate of attendance which qualifies as a continuous professional development program for most of the institutions. Please please pick your one. It's signed by the Chief of Staff and myself. And then also, if you want to print it, it's at a small fee. If you want it digital, it is free, but you need to leave your details. I hope you've got a book. You read it. There's a session on the role of the company secretary. Please carefully read the book. Once again, thank you very much, and hopefully we'll reconvene again next year. Thank you.
One more time, our convener, a round of applause. There is a backdrop outside. We encourage all who came in groups, institutions, to please do well and take photos at the backdrop. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how far we've come as the second edition of the National Boardroom Governance Summit. Let's leave this place daring to be different. My name is Jerry Ajololo. On behalf of the convener, I'd like to thank you all for coming. Goodbye and Godspeed.
In Ghana today, many people still think that the role of the company secretary belongs only to the lawyer. However, the boardroom has evolved and now needs somebody trained not only in the law, but in corporate governance, the art and science of leading with integrity, accountability, and foresight. That person is the chartered governance professional.
My name is George Coleman, and I'm the president of the Chartered Governance Institute for West Africa. Our institute comprises a community of highly skilled professionals, men and women dedicated to strengthening the governance of our organizations, institutions, and public bodies. Chartered governance professionals are trained and certified by the Chartered Governance Institute, UK and Ireland, formerly known as the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators, UK. We are experts in the full spectrum of board leadership. We master subjects like corporate law, financial strategy, governance and compliance, boardroom dynamics, risk management, and leadership and ethics. This training positions us to advise the board strategically, not just legally. We ensure that decisions are sound, compliant, and in service of long-term value. We are not a substitute for lawyers. We are a different kind of experts, trained specifically to lead on governance, to shape culture, uphold accountability, and ensure that boards function at their very best.
As Ghana strengthens her institutions, let's also recognize those equipped to guide them, the chartered governance professional. We are custodians of governance and partners in national progress.